but delighted to welcome you all to this webinar, and I'll give you some background in just a moment. I will say just on the logistics side, the call is in a muted mode so that we can record this and keeping the line clear, but we certainly do want to hear from people, and there are a number of ways to do that. As we go through the presentations, we want to kind of get the presentations out and then open it up for hopefully a very robust discussion. If at any point during the call you want to get a question in the queue, you can put it in the chat feature if you are online with ReadyTalk, or you can email avac@avac.org, and we'll put the emails or put the questions in the queue. And then we will also give some instructions on how to unmute the line to ask questions live, so that we can have a robust and exciting conversation, because this is perhaps one of the most important, interesting, and challenging topics that we all are facing in HIV prevention. I'm going to provide a little background. Ooh, and if for those who aren't speaking, if you could go on mute, and that should be *6 to mute, and then again we'll give you instructions, *7 to unmute. But I'm delighted to welcome so many of you onto this call, both those calling in from South Africa as well as people calling in from many other parts of the world. And we're excited to give you some early insights into a project that has been going on over the course of this year and is going forward for the next year or so, but wanted to give some early insights and really people's input and insights into how this might look to someone who's not been involved with it from the outset. It is obviously very much focused on, as I said at the outset, one of the most critical and challenging issues that we all face, which is how to help engage young women who are at high risk of HIV infection, engage with HIV prevention programs, and how can we create programs that might be working better for them and to prevent new infections. So we're going to give a sense of an overall project called the HIV Prevention Market Manager very briefly. I'm then going to turn it over to some colleagues in South Africa to describe the process by which we are trying to explore and understand better young women's interaction with HIV and HIV prevention. And then, as I say, we'll open it up for comments and conversations. But again, throughout the time, please do feel free to put questions in the chat feature or email avac@avac.org. The HIV Prevention Market Manager is a project that has been running for the last couple of years. It is led by AVAC in partnership with the Clinton Health Access Initiative, or CHI, and it is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the project was established in partnership to really try to accelerate the research to rollout activities. And when we describe that, the bodies of work are really looking at how do we help ensure that there is a portfolio of prevention options that are not just developed by researchers and scientists and product developers, but perhaps even more importantly, are available, accessible, and used by people who need them most. So a body of work, and I'll describe it in just a moment, is trying to accelerate new product introduction. At the same time, we're trying to do work that informs product development, products that are further back in development, but could benefit from earlier thinking and earlier insights into health systems and users, so that we're developing better products for the future. And throughout that, whether it's about developing new or delivering what we have, it's how to build a sustainable HIV delivery platform so that any product, whether that is a condom, whether that is a service like voluntary medical male circumcision, whether it is oral PrEP or a future technology, the dapivirine vaginal ring, which is next up hopefully, or an injectable which is in development, or next generation products, that they would more seamlessly enter communities and programs so that people who want them and who need them can actually access them and use them. So that's the overall it's the overall project design. I will say that it's divided into 5 major buckets, and you'll see here in this slide it very much focuses on the end user, and I'll show that again in just a moment. And again, this idea of working both on product development of things upstream, they're on the left-hand side of that slide, and on the right-hand side, the product introduction and scale-up. And at the same time, at the bottom, it's how to help country decision-making and global coordination. Another way to look at this, and I think very importantly for today's conversation, is that the project very much puts the user at the center, that understanding end users or potential users of prevention options will help us make better decisions, or help funders make better decisions about what they invest in terms of product development. We don't want them investing in a product that no one wants to use. We want them to think ahead and make sure resources are available for next generation products. And if funders do make those better decisions, then we hope on the right-hand side that we would improve the oral PrEP programs of today. We would inform the introduction of both dapivirine ring and cabotegravir, the long-acting injectable, and that we might influence future product development. And then throughout that, as you'll see at the bottom, is how do we help create efficiencies across all the different stakeholders working in prevention. Very importantly, before I hand it over to colleagues, very importantly, this project is nested within other activities. And so as I said, we focus a lot on trying to understand who might eventually use these products. And this is a graphic about breaking the cycles of transmission. You have seen this undoubtedly many different times, originating from the CAPRISA team and the RE team in KwaZulu-Natal, about understanding how infections are happening. And I just want to highlight there are 3 different projects, 2 on the right-hand side in blue, and 1 on the left-hand side. And what I've done here is showed on the right-hand side, you'll see a Gates-funded VMMC project. This was a project several years ago that the Gates Foundation funded for a number of partners led by PSI to work to understand in Zimbabwe and Zambia and their interactions with voluntary medical male circumcision. And that really addresses one fundamental way to break the cycle of transmission. But there are 2 new projects. The top right, PSI has a project looking at test and treat, and I do encourage you all to join another webinar on Thursday at this very same time, where PSI and colleagues will describe their early insights on trying to understand HIV testing and hoping to improve the linkage to treatment and care as well as to prevention. And that body of work, as I say, is led by PSI with some of the very same partners who worked on the project on VMMC. Others on the VMMC team, including Ipsos and including Final Mile and Upstream, who worked on the project with PSI in Zimbabwe and Zambia, are now working with AVAC and the Prevention Market Manager for this box on the left-hand side in pink, the project looking at fostering uptake and adherence of new HIV prevention in young women. And that's the body of work that we're going to spend the next hour and a half or so talking about. We want to present to you the early body of work, and I should say that this is very early. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and friend Annabelle Gomez in just a minute to talk about what we're doing over a 1.5-year period. What we're presenting this morning or this afternoon is just the very early insights, and the idea is that there are a number of bodies of work to come next, and we really look to explore that with all of you, not just on this call, but in the long term going forward. But you can see that if we all get this right together and understand these different components of both the cycles of transmission and how we might break them, we might actually get ahead of this epidemic. And so that's the framework for the conversation today. As I say, as I turn it over to Annabelle, if you do have questions throughout this conversation, please do put them in the chat feature or email avac@avac.org. And at the end, I will give some instructions on how to unmute yourself to engage. But first, I'll turn it over to Annabelle, who directs all of our marketing activities under the Prevention Market Manager focused on potential users of prevention. And she's going to walk us through very briefly the methodology of the South Africa program. So Annabelle, if you're not already unmuted, *7, and happy to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mitchell, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody on the line. So we're going to speak specifically about some research we're conducting in South Africa as part of Prevention Market Manager. And it has 3 clear objectives, which are who are the potential users of new prevention products? How do we identify them? How do we reach them? So the who, what, where of the girls and young women that are likely to be using new prevention products, and the learnings from the information that we're currently getting from the research that we're conducting. This is phased research, and what you're going to get at the moment as a result of this webinar is the outputs of the qualitative work. We're currently in the quantitative research segment that we've just started. From there, we go to a discrete choice experiment in which we will test attributes and features of different prevention products, give them weighting so that we understand a little bit more about the possibilities of who uses what product in what segment. After that, we will do some development and some human-centered design ideation with developers and implementers, donors, to try and figure out how do we get a better product, and then we go to prototyping and piloting. And what I should make clear is up to the quant research stage, all our research is product agnostic. We start getting into product-specific work in the discrete choice experiment. And then the idea would be that we start identifying which segment is likely to use which product and what information from what we're learning at the moment can program implementers use immediately to make their prevention programs stronger and better. Next slide, please. So we spoke to 240 adolescent girls and young women aged 15 to 24. They were broken up into two groups, 15 to 19 and 20 to 24. The research was conducted in two provinces, 5 districts in KwaZulu-Natal and 3 districts in Mpumalanga. These districts were chosen in conjunction with the Ministries of Health and the district and the provincial governments, and we very much focused on districts with high HIV prevalence, and tried very hard to make sure we were working in districts that hadn't been over-researched in order to not upset anybody else's research, but to get as many research-naive people as we could into our study. We also spoke to girls that were sexually active, had unprotected sex in the last 6 months, had more than one sexual partner in the last 12 months, and believed that their sexual partners could possibly have had other partners. And this was important because we were trying to understand from the girls' perspective what they saw as faithful, or the relationships that they felt that they were in. We then spoke to male partners, matriarchal figures, and this included aunts, mothers, big sisters, anybody who sort of fulfilled that role. Community healthcare workers, because we discovered from all our early research that this was a fairly under-researched population, and very much a population that serves as an entry gate into new programs, and nurses, and specifically nurses because most adolescent girls and young women in South Africa see nurses over and above doctors. So we got very different insights from each of those groups, which you will see as we go through, as Yolanda and Cindy go through. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the research for the influencers was conducted either in small group discussions of 5 or individual group discussions. For the girls, we had a very different approach. Again, this was a mixture of small group discussions and individual work. We had a multi-method approach to our work using behavioural economics as the approach and a lot of ethnographic techniques to try and get the information. And each one of what you'll see here is sort of 3 separate bits of research that we used with the girls. So the persona activity was very much focused on understanding beliefs and attitudes, life goals, values, relationships. by each of the girls. The ethnolab activity was to understand priorities and peer impacts, and we tested in excess of 50 plus hypotheses in that particular area, and the hypothesis came from a lot of research that we did early on and a lot of stakeholder interviews that we did early on. And then the journey map was very much to try to understand behaviours, life events, situational goals, roles and interactions that girls had in their lives. As you can see, we then triangulated all the information to get a very systemic understanding of the girls and the problems that they were facing in the context that they were facing. And what you're seeing is the outputs of this sort of three-stepped research that we triangulated. Can we have the next slide, please? So as part of putting together the research design, we spoke to a lot of people, and there was a lot of localised learning and feedback from the groups that we had been dealing with. So, for example, we did a lot of research beforehand to find out where the gaps of the research were. So, if I have anybody on the line listening who are researchers in adolescent girls and young women, thank you very much, because your input was invaluable in order for us to get the information to the stage that we've gotten to. We also did a lot of consultation with in excess of 45 stakeholders within South Africa, and that included implementers, donors, advocates, district governing bodies. We then went back to the girls and that we were interviewing, that we were going to interview, to ask them how they wanted the questions asked, were we using the correct language, were we asking the right questions, and again change the research, the way we approach the research as a result of feedback from the actual end users that we were speaking to. And then we also have an advisory board, which is advising not just our project, but the TTM project, the Test and Treat project that Mitchell referred to earlier, which also gave us input into our research design. And finally, once we got all the outputs, we went back to some adolescent girls and young women in Mpumalanga to see whether the outputs resonated with them, as well as going back to specific stakeholders in our stakeholder advisory board. So there's been, throughout the process, there has been a lot of localised input. There has been a lot of flexibility and willingness to change our research design and our questioning and our approach as much as possible, with input from the end user and people who we hope will end up using this research. And it's been very much a focus of what we're doing. And part of the reason that we're doing a readout now before we come to the end of the research is because we want to keep getting this input. So again, please ask your questions. And it's also because we want to make sure that the research is as usable as possible as we roll it out. So again, you'll see as we go through this, there's probably some learnings that people of the line should be able to apply. Next slide, please. I'm going to now hand this over to Yolanda and Sydney, who will take you through the key insights.
And as we do, let me just also quickly, it's Mitchell again, introduce Yolanda and Cindy. As I mentioned, this has been a grand partnership and is a grand partnership with a whole number of stakeholders, as Annabelle described. The body of work you're about to see is being led by a group called Final Mile, and as I said, they were very involved in earlier work around voluntary medical male circumcision. And Yolanda Krokamp leads the project in South Africa. She's a research psychologist by training, and is working with Final Mile and with the design team you'll hear a bit about upstream, who are working on some of the design elements that will come as the next step in this activity, as Annabelle described. In addition, Sindizwe Washington was one of the moderators and is a researcher based with Ask Africa, who lead the fieldwork in South Africa, who's guided the qualitative feedback, the qualitative fieldwork to date that I'm going to get some insights from. So just wanted to give you a sense of where Yolande and Sindizwe sit within this partnership, and happy to now turn it over to Yolande.
Thank you very much, Mitchell. Our key focus for the project was to come up with solutions to improve adoption and adherence of HIV prevention behaviors and products. So this is really a design project and not a research project per se, but using behavioral economics and a user-centered approach, we started off by understanding this HIV prevention journey for the adolescent girls and young women from very much, firstly, a product standpoint, right? But we quickly learned that it's fairly intuitive that prevention is only a small part of the bigger phenomena of relationship management and sexual health, and things like usage of condoms or depend more on the relationship context and the quality of the relationship, the time that people spend together, the relationship experiences, and that when it comes to this journey that the girls are on, it's very much focused on relationship management and sexual health, and it overweighs everything else. So if we go on to the next slide, the reason that the very reason that we look at it from the lens of relationship and sexual health is because it helps us to understand how adolescent girls and young women make decisions, including decisions relating to HIV prevention, and what are their goals, their motivations, and how their goals change as they progress through this journey of relationship management. So firstly, we see that it's a journey of relationship management and sexual health. But the second key insight is that girls do not associate HIV prevention, with, the word prevention doesn't bring up connotations with HIV, but the word prevention aligns much more with connotations of pregnancy. So when we look at adolescent girls' goals of negotiating relationship and healthy sexual habits, we need to understand it in a much broader way. So Cindy, if you would like to talk more about the wording and how it's used. I think, Cindy, can you hear me?
Cindy, you need to hit *7 to unmute your line.
So while we're waiting for Cindy, we have heard that, when you use the word prevention in field, the immediate connotation is, actively seeking pregnancy prevention. And prevention, however, in the minds of the adolescent girls and young women, are much more a passive and reactive behavior. So where for pregnancy, they would take a series of steps to ensure that they are safe. So, for example, going to the clinic to actively seek, their contraceptives. When it comes to HIV, they would very much talk about avoiding it and how you can move away from this disease. And it becomes sort of a much more passive reaction towards HIV. And they would say HIV is not for girls like me, and they would carry these mental models where they would think that It's for girls that get drunk, and that even if you get it, you can just react to it and treat it like you would treat a flu. So from an adolescent girls and young women standpoint, these are two very different things. Pregnancy is something that you prevent proactively, and the word prevention speaks to that, versus the avoidance or the treatment of HIV. And I think the implication here is that when we start looking at initiatives and how we frame and communicate HIV prevention and pregnancy prevention, we would need to understand that preventing HIV and using the word prevention would immediately conjure up steps to be taken by adolescent girls, which they are not. They're trying to avoid it, and HIV is handled very passively. And HIV and pregnancy are really compartmentalized into two critically distinct categories. Thank you. You can move on to the next slide. So when it comes to risks and rewards, what we see that whether it's pregnancy or HIV or any other decision, we know that decision making is always a trade-off between risks and reward. And it's not something that girls sit down and rationally calculate. It's really much more subjective in nature, and it is a feeling. Girls describe it as a feeling. And what we've learned is that it really comes in what we call blips, like risk blips. It's like on a piece of highlights on the radar where a girl gets maybe a rash or some infection, and at that point in time, she feels that she is at risk, and it's a short moment in time. And we think that this might be a missed opportunity, because the moment she feels risk, she will try and either test herself or go for testing. And as soon as she tests as negative, and that test result provides a sense of relief, and what it does, it reinforces the prior behavior. So on the reward side, on the contrary, rewards, although it might be more immediate, it's also more continuous. And it's not a direct comparison when it comes to HIV in terms of risk and reward. So if we think about male partners, for example, they reward their partners, and we know that they were talking about how beautiful the girls are, reinforcing her needs for safety, for admiration, and that works because he can do it every day, whereas the risk blip comes in only momentarily. So the major implication is that when we start framing risk as you will die or you'll get really sick, it's unlikely to be effective because really it's a trade-off between risk and reward. And we need to look at how we can introduce and exploit maybe some of the rewards that already exist to complement some of our efforts. So at the moment, it seems like the risk blips, with risk blips, there's no incentive to be adherent, and that we need to look at phases and ways to adopt and adhere to products. Cindy, have we found you now? Cindy is having trouble. So what we've seen is adolescent girls would talk about that when they feel at risk, it's really momentarily, and that partners are constantly employing countermeasure to impede their safe behaviors, which means that the girl might say that I want to use a condom, and the partner would just come up with all sorts of reasons, positively reinforcing maybe unsafe behaviors. So also when it comes to safer behavior or clinically proven HIV prevention methods, there's also much more cost associated with those girls saying, for example, that it will drive away the partner, fear of gender-based violence. Those are all real in their lives. Thank you. You can move to the next one. So the fourth very important insight that we came to is that adolescent girls and young women have a distorted perception of those at risk. And we talk about a subjective differentiation or a subjective appraisal of the distance between themselves and those at risk. What does that mean? It means that in that moment of risk, the mental model that are at play is that she would be able to judge a person by, for example, their looks. They would be saying that girls are, for example, skinny and they have bad skin, and they would think that they would be able to judge whether the person are really a risky partner just through the appearance of the person. But when it comes to those appraisals and the distance they put between themselves and potentially someone that they identify to be at risk, those perceptions become distorted because we know HIV treatment has really improved over the years. And with good treatment, it means that people with HIV, living with HIV, look healthy, are healthy. And norms like, HIV is only when I have multiple casual partners, and instead of multiple regular partners, become challenged because the girls would have multiple partners. They would, for example, say that they've got a minister of transport and a minister of health and a minister of finance, each contributing differently in their relationships to them, but some would be more regular and others would be more casual. And through those relationship distances, start evaluating whether they are actually at risk or not. So they form these rules in their minds about how to deal with these relationships and how to stay healthy in the relationships based on these distorted perceptions, right? And when they have a risk blip, that prompts them to either visit a clinic or approach a healthcare worker, and that provides the opportunity for us to deal with these mental models when it comes to HIV, and it reinforces the fact that you can't really judge risk through appearance, and it's not just about multiple regular partners or irregular partners. You can actually be at risk when you do have regular partners. So I believe, Cindy, you are back on if you wanted to talk more to this point.
Cindy, we can't hear you if you are speaking.
So, what Cindy is talking.
Go ahead, Yolanda, and let me see if I can sort it out on this end, but go ahead, keep going.
So, social norms associated with HIV positive status are that, you are HIV positive because of your immoral behavior or your use behavior. And what we see in communities is that there's still a lot of judgment and a lot of criticism and stigmatization happening. And this translates into the girls comparing their risk to someone else who has multiple irregular partners. And they would rationalize their risk as saying, well, I don't have different partners every day, so therefore I wouldn't be at risk. So when we go to the next insight, please, Levi, insight number 5, what we see is that although prevention is supposed to be proactive, we can really see that with distorted mental models, the distancing, and their reactive addressing of HIV, that they really try and react to testing. They react to testing as a bit of a reset button, which just means they go in, they get tested, and when they get tested negative, that really feels to them, well, that just confirms that, you know, I weren't doing anything wrong in my life. And we see this also in other work like the Jalindi study, that, you know, right after testing, adherence to PrEP dropped. And it's also confirmed in other work that we've done on TB. After the initial treatment, the doctor does an X-ray, and, you know, being human, he would say, yep, you're looking good, all is good. And what happens then, the patient feels, okay, this gives me the go-ahead, I'm doing well, and then what they do is they stop medication. So from an implication standpoint, is we need to see how we can use testing as a point where we can reset, look at how we can really use the blip of risk to emphasize it as a near miss and a step to start adopting new behaviors. And we need to also think about the implication of self-testing kits, for example, because we are putting self-testing kits out there. I test at home, okay, I'm honky-dory, everything is going well, which means I can continue with what I'm doing. So when we look at the next insights, we've got 12 that we would like to highlight with you.
Right, yeah.
Oh, is that you, Cindy?
Yes. Can everybody hear me now?
Oh, fantastic. We can. Sorry to interrupt you, Yolande, but it sounds like we have Cindy vocal now.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Great.
So, Cindy, just on time, I'm going to hand over to you to talk to insight number 6.
All right. Thank you. Now we're moving on to the next slide. With this particular insight, when we used to talk to the girls, we, learning that, good treatment reduces the urgency for prevention is just touching on the point that Yolande has just mentioned. We've seen that the girls do overestimate their ability to cope. Now, this is due to a number of reasons. With the girls that we spoke to, most of them know and are living with somebody who has HIV. So a lot of the communication that they hear around them is things like, oh, HIV is like the flu, you can just use the pill now, and it's okay, and you can live with it. So even though they see people living with HIV and they see how difficult it is living with HIV, a lot of the girls are surrounded by that type of communication around them from their matriarchal figures, from mothers, from their friends in the community. So the main point is prevention communication needs to be separated from a test and treat and more focused on the positive self-protective behaviors. Thank you, Land.
So that has got real implications for how we position products like PrEP, for example. Positioning PrEP, for example, not in the space of just it's not just about avoiding HIV, but it's more about reclaiming your sexuality, your sexual life, and your sexual health, and framing it positively. So we can move to the next insight, number 7.
So thank you. So again here, when we start thinking of prevention methods, condoms being the primary method, it requires a high degree of self-control. So with the girls, we know that the self-control is impacted significantly when we're dealing with a lot of decisions, especially decisions around the scarcity of resources. Most of the effective prevention methods, like hand hygiene, for instance, do not require that. They primarily bank for making it more of a habit, less than self-control measure. So oftentimes when we were speaking to the girls, they would say things like, I cannot stop in the middle of an arousal stage and think about using protection or prevention. Also, this had other impacts on their relationship and also with their partners. So self-control, as well, the degrees of self-control was quite impacted. So HIV prevention methods don't work in this domain. Girls would require ways to deal with that. And we do expect it to vary. Some girls are able to do it while others are not able to do that. And more often than not, we found that the girls were saying that they are not able to stop. And they do not have the self-control that is required for them to be able to use prevention methods pre or during sex. We can move on to the next slide.
Thank you, Cindy. So when looking at insight number 8, that speaks to the fact that our prevention methods and preferences are not static. It differs in terms of the relationship, it differs in terms of the occasion, moment, and really that relationship dynamics impacting most profoundly. And this, I think, is an important part to think about, especially because it impacts new products, new methods that we are trying to introduce. Later on, we'll show you how we've developed a framework for this relationship journey of the girls. And you would note that her preferences change, her goals change, not only in terms of life stage, but also in terms of relationships. And we see in other work that the key reason why adolescent girls would stop adhering, for example, to oral PrEP, as they reported in the Jalindi study, is because of things changing in their lives. Okay, so adolescent girls and young women are told to abstain, to use condoms, to test, and they make it a choice. Most pick testing, and because it seems doable. So they create choices when there is a lack of choices. So what we are talking about is that when we build new products, you can't just say that this segment or this type of girl is an oral PrEP girl while someone else is a condoms girl, because it might change. And we need to expect the change, and we need to think more dynamically about the girls that we're trying to help. And because we don't have many choices, they create choices. And I know we actually chuckled a lot about how creative girls can get when it comes to creating choices. Cindy, I don't know, some examples from the field there that you can maybe highlight for us.
Oh, yes, most definitely, Yolanda. So there was quite a variety of different examples that the girls shared with us in terms of how they feel that they are protecting themselves. One would be to use some bath salts after sex to wash the intimate areas, and again, that was almost treating HIV or removing the HIV after sexual intercourse. As well as some girls who still believed in more of traditional methods and traditional medicines and rituals. They would, use a razor and use some natural herbal medicines to apply on the skin, and they would believe that this is actually protecting them from the HIV before they actually have sexual intercourse. So again, just touching on what you were referring to, Yolanda, about being very relationship focused, these methods would also be used with different partners. So for instance, with a partner, a steady boyfriend or a father of my child whom I see once a month, and I want to show that I trust them and that I have been faithful to him, would use the method where they scar themselves on their bodies, use some medicine, and that will protect them from the HIV, versus a more transactional sexual relationship with, say, a truck driver or a blesser or a minister of transport after the sex. They would then use these methods where they're using these bath salts or medicines or herbs to wash the intimate areas, to wash their whole bodies, in fact, sometimes. Sometimes it would be concoctions that they would assimilate and drink as well. All of these creative methods are things that, A, are accessible to the girls, because remember, we're talking to young girls here who are telling us that they don't really have access to the type of healthcare that, that they are wanting and are desiring. And secondly, so these traditional methods is what is accessible to them. This is what they can get from the next door neighbor, from the other friend, or from a cousin friend, etc. And these are popular methods because they're also quite ingrained within the culture. These are traditional cultural practices that they're familiar with. So again, you see them relying on what they know to protect them and to help treat them for when they feel that they have been at risk of HIV.
Thank you, Cindy. So if we move on to the next insight, what we've also seen is, as we are talking to girls across the stages and across the spectrum, when it comes to relationships and their journey towards sexual health, the key change in behavior that we were seeing is that they change in terms of a focus on themselves, a focus on others, to a focus on themselves. And this self includes their families. So it's no more about what others think and what whether it's something that aligns with the other's goals and how she would be perceived. But it becomes more about her own goals and what she wants, not only for herself, but for her family. So self-efficacy becomes a key driver here. And her belief and her ability to change her outcomes and achieve her goals is very much due to the relationship and sexual health goals that she has. The natural implication would be that we need to look at programs and how they are influencing this efficacy. Girls are not victims in any way, shape, or form. And we see, for example, cash transfer programs fall within this domain, right? From our work in other programs, that we see that when girls are younger, they seem to need much higher levels of social approval. And when they get older, they are expected to be a lot more dependent.
Now, that does not mean that these girls do not have agency or cannot decide. We saw girls saying things that like, I like having sex and I want to have sex. These girls that we spoke to across KZN and in Mpumalanga, these girls were young, they were vibrant, they were very, very intelligent. The narrative we heard continuously through these young women was that, they come from homes where there's just a lack of communication and relationship around sexual health. When they are young, it's all about abstinence. And only once they get pregnant or one of their friends get pregnant, it's about prevention. And remember, prevention meaning preventing from pregnancy. But the girls that we specifically spoke to said, no one is speaking to us about sex. Our mothers are not speaking to us, our aunts are not speaking to us about sex. But yet we want to be talking about it. We want safe spaces where we can be able to share our concerns, our thoughts, our feelings. So let's change that narrative. Young African women love and want to have sex. So how do we use this information about prevention to shape new interventions?
Thank you, Cindy. So on insight number 10, when we move on, if we look at the learnings from a social and systems perspective, we see that for a lot of these girls, support networks that would enable prevention are missing. And in general, adolescent girls and young women were expressing a missing support group. They felt that people that they know are judgmental, and they end up relying on peers. And we see that a lot of the peers are equally ignorant, right? When it comes to the matriarchs, the mother figures, what tended to happen is that these mothers themselves, although they want to influence the behavior, they themselves aren't knowledgeable. And they end up wanting to control the behaviors and the decisions of the girls. Girls would say, I get preached to you. My mother shouts at me. When it comes to community healthcare workers and nurses, girls see them as really credible. But then when they relate experiences with these healthcare professionals, they would say that they are really judgmental, really harsh, and they have their own mental models that seem to be destructive in this relationship. And when it comes to the clinic setup, girls were saying that the clinics aren't necessarily designed with confidentiality and privacy in mind. People would see them in the queue, and things would really show and highlight their presence in a context of stigma. This is problematic. So finally, peers who may be less harsh because they are in the same situation are not considered as trustworthy. And in our research, we saw that girls believe that their peers are also performing high-risk behaviors, and they are not really in a position to advise them. So when they are looking for advice, it's normally a slightly older girl with more experience, and that experience has got a lot of implication and credibility with it. So the implication is that adolescent girls and young women are hungry for holistic and empathetic advice, and we need models and systems that would really support that. Their partners, on the other hand, who are probably the single biggest influences, are, for the most part, negative influence when it comes to prevention, because they put sexual gratification before prevention and longer-term goals. So when we move on to the next insight, Cindy, would you please talk to that?
Yes, just if I may add something, Yolanda, to what you've just said. When we spoke to the matriarchal figures and the young girls and young women as well, one key insight that was also quite important, speaking to this key insight of number 11, was they were reminding us of the indigenous knowledge system that exists within these two provinces of both KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga, of young women that were called Iqhiyiza. And just what that means, these would be young women that would be slightly older, in their late 20s, and they would be identified in communities as the more knowledgeable, young, wise women who had experience, but they're more social and relatable for young girls to be able to speak to. Because part of the internal struggles that the matriarchal figures and some of the community health workers and nurses were having was around, we don't feel that we are relatable enough to these girls. Some of them, they want to speak to us, and speak to them, and we have conversations to them about sex and sexuality. But we really wish that there was somebody that was slightly younger that could be able to relate to them. And mothers and young girls were reminding us that these models used to exist. Culturally and traditionally. And they were desiring that these models, to be in existence, because they feel that there's a need for that right now. So when we hear from, now just speaking to this slide number 11, is when we hear influencers' perspectives, we see that most of them don't hold these girls in quite high regard. Words like, oh, stupid was very, very common, or it's only the clever girls that are able to be safe are some of the things that we would commonly hear. And we can see that these are direct results, very instruction lead to communication, where it's about, the girls end up wanting to, accessing things like Facebook and other social media, trying to be able to find platforms where they can speak to other young women who share their thoughts, their feelings, and their concerns. So essentially, it is likely to push the girl away from them and make them ineffective from the matriarchal figures, for instance. The implications essentially are the same, of bringing the empathy gap and provide better persuasion tools and message to these influencers. If you may move on.
So we see that adolescent girls and young women, regardless of where they are in the relationship journey, sexual health journey, have a very strong desire to feel safe. And what happens is that this strong desire to feel safe are used by influencers to either move her forward towards sexual health and good sexual relationships or healthy relationships, or it holds her back on this journey. And we see that when it comes to the desire to feeling safe, the so-called protectors, the people or the influencers that fulfill that role, are really reinforcing, if they are holding her back, negative behavior, risky behavior. And at the moment, the young men and their partners seem to do that quite effectively. Say, if you have sex without a condom, you don't have to worry about anything. I'll be there for you. And when it comes to friends who could potentially be very influential, they are considered to be less trustworthy and less knowledgeable. And although they might seek safety in their friendship circles, they don't necessarily get pushed forward to a healthy sexual habit because it's not credible information that they get. So when we look at the 12 insights holistically, we firstly understand that prevention needs to be understood from an AGYW perspective. And this is why the user design approach is so important, because we have learned that they've got a very specific way of looking at HIV as part of a relationship management and sexual health goal and not a separate thing. And that when we start using words and messaging and treatments, that we need to align with their perspective. When it comes to risks and rewards and the trade-offs that they make, it becomes really about how we capitalize on those opportunities. And we need to take into consider the roles that people play. So please move on to the recap slide. That's what we highlighted there, the 3 key themes of the 12 insights and the implications of it. And then when we go on to the next slide, the opportunity for further learning, we really need to start look at the programs and how we can complement each other, and the healthcare systems, how we could maybe optimize that, and how we look at shared risk with male partners. And we'll discuss some of the implications a bit more. I want us to move on to the integrated journey framework, On the next slide, please. And next one. And what we see here is this is the framework from an adolescent girls and young women point of view. And our journey framework adheres to the notion of progress. So from the left to the right, there are 4 stages. And between those stages, there are key milestones that girls would achieve. So what we see is it's a progression, and it means that as you progress, you could also regress. You can move backwards and forwards in this journey towards sexual health and healthy relationships, because that's the nature of life. We have life events that can appear at different places in the journey that pushes you forward or moves you back. The most important thing about this journey, because it's relationship and sexual health focused, is to understand that it's not static, right? And that if we look at it, there are 4 stages that we've identified, from the left to the right of the page, which indicates the progress. And the milestones are indicated with the dark black circles in the middle between the stages, and each circle really signifies a milestone that people pass through. And the stages are really the terrain between those milestones, and we have indicated that with gray arrows at the top to show you that the pathways we will talk about is how does someone really move through these stages and the milestones as defined by this pathway. What barriers do they need to overcome, and do they move smoothly or do they get stuck? And it's really important to note that for us as programmers and implementers and funders, we clearly would want to move people through the stages as quickly as possible with as little friction as possible. And the green line on the slide represents that, the ideal, right? However, what we've seen in this project from the findings of our ethnolab and speaking to these girls and communities is that the journey of an adolescent girl and young women at risk is really ultimately very different at the moment. But at least this framework allows us a way, a very useful way to understand how the system works. And it also gives us a framework of understanding how we can change it. So let's describe this journey in a bit more detail, and let's look at it through the eyes of adolescent girl and young women. So I'm going to ask Cindy to talk through, if we move to the next slide, some of the milestones and what girls have said as they reach those milestones.
Fantastic, Yolande. So when we were traveling through different parts of the provinces, we were meeting a variety of different girls who came from a variety of different backgrounds and experiences. So if we look at that first stage there, shaping my views, so they're coming in and we're speaking to them, and all of them have various different views. But to reach that first milestone, just to give you some examples of some of the things that the girls were going through and some of the things that they said, a lot of the girls we spoke to came from child-hated households. And they would tell us things like, you know, I am raising my siblings and I'm responsible for the family because both my parents had passed away from HIV. Other things they would tell us like, my best friend whom I've known all my life actually has the virus and she was born with it. Or they would tell you about all the girls, my older sister or my aunt, such, you know, she was dating so-and-so, or she was married with a person and she got infected with HIV. So you see them reaching that first milestone. And just to read out that example, HIV is not for girls like me. I take care of myself. The truth is that I don't use condoms all the time, but I test regularly with my partner. So girls reach this milestone, when something really has hit home, something really that is very personal within their personal space and environment, where they're actually to see the impacts of HIV within their lives and how they're affected around that. And you see them reaching that first particular milestone. So continue traveling them through seeing the world through their eyes and listening to their stories and then beginning to seeing their reality. We get to reach that second milestone, which is about idolized rule that is created. Here, for example, with HIV, you just take a pill at 8 when you're at a party and you go behind a room and you just take it. So where that comes from is some of the girls that we're speaking to, as we mentioned, young, vibrant, very social, they were going out. And they obviously know friends of theirs who are infected with the virus. And how would I be able to identify them is that at particular times at the party, you'd see one friend going behind to the bathroom with her ARV tucked in neatly in her bra, and she would take it and she would continue having a good time with socializing. Or maybe they live with a matriarchal figure in the home whom they have to continuously remind at 8 o'clock or at 5 o'clock each day to be able to take their medicine. So these are some of the things that are really shaping their view and really getting to see their reality of how they live in this world and the things that are happening in and around them. And we will continue talking to these girls, and as they continue on their journey, here we begin to see them identifying boundaries. For instance, they would say things like, I would tell my boyfriend that I'm not comfortable, and I would also tell him that we can rather go our separate ways if he refuses to use protection. Some of the things that would have maybe happened at this stage in the girls' lives, based on the stories that they would tell us, are things like they would find out that their partner has been cheating. And how they would happen is, they would have an STI or an STD, and they would go to the clinic and they would speak to a nurse or they would speak to a community health worker, and they'd find that maybe their partner has been promiscuous. And you see here, they begin to set these boundaries for themselves that, yes, I want to continue having a sexual relationship with my partner, but I also don't want to be putting myself in continuous risk. Again, or you hear of them telling us about stories about their friends who also were in a similar situation of being infected with an STD or an STI, or a friend that has passed away, for instance, through the virus, because she had this continuous going to the clinic, continuous being sickly, and partners refusing to protect them, or partners refusing to use any protection. And because of these experiences that are happening in their lives, these begin to help shape the girl's ability to be assertive about when and why they want to be using protection, to the point where they would rather not be in that relationship because they now are beginning to see the risk in a different perspective. And as we move on to the third part of the journey and reaching that milestone, and here again we have a quote where one of the girls would say, if you do use prevention, I don't think that it would have a negative impact on your life because I have a future. The partner I have is now not my husband, but I want to be clean when I meet my husband. And again, you heard a lot of these comments from the younger girls who speak to older girls. The older girls in the community whom they know to be sexually active and they're comfortable talking to them about sex. And they would look at these older girls and have conversations about their aspirations in their lives. And they would model themselves and idolize these older girls. And they would say, you know what, I also want to, for instance, to get married, or I want to have an education because maybe she knows a girl down the road who she used to study with and now has gone to university and has a degree. Or she has another friend of hers who is studying and is now working. So again, she's surrounded by different girls who are engaging differently with their lives and having different opportunities. And this opens them up to a world where their aspirations and their goals begin to change, and they realize there's more to life than finding myself in a similar predicament like my mother or my aunt or my friend who is infected. I actually want more from life. And this is when you see them being able to start then preaching, communicating to other girls and being like, this is who I am, this is what I want, and this is what I feel that I deserve from life. And then you see them beginning to advise others about their decisions that they are taking and their thoughts and their feelings as well. I mean, other people who played a role, especially in this space, are community health workers, whom again have that direct access with the girls because they work within these communities, and it's a woman that they know and they're very familiar with, and they can go to their homes and sit down and they can sit down with them and talk about their lives and talk about things that they want from life. So you begin to understand the different aspects of experiences that are shaping the girl's journey and weaving her from when she started off thinking, it's not for me, it's not for girls like me, and eventually being able to form an opinion, and then eventually being able to see the impact of somebody who is infected, and then beginning to set those boundaries with herself and having rules about who she is and about her life, and eventually reaching that stage where she's more actualized about who she is and what she wants. So these are just some of the stories that I'm sharing with you that the girls shared with us along these particular journeys. Thank you, Yolanda. Let's move on to the next slide.
Thank you, Cindy. So let's look at the adolescent girls and young women's journey towards healthy sexual relationships and how they manage relationships. The first thing to understand this journey is to understand that on the left, and apologies for those on audio who don't have the visual in front, but when you start on this journey, there's no particular milestone. This represents sort of an on-ramp to the journey. And that on-ramp on the journey to the stage called Shaping My View, which we call stage 0, is that really girls are forming their own views and opinions about relationships and how to manage it and how sexual health would look within healthy relationships. And what is interesting is that at this stage, it's important that in her context, HIV prevention isn't part of her thinking. The achievement at the end of this stage is her own opinion. She's not simply regurgitating what someone else has said, the information she's been blasted with, but we see strong associations with the broader world of adolescence in this first stage, in that most adolescent girls and young women are concerned with creating a view that is their own, the whole idea of individuation. And you see a lot of rebellion and rejection of views of others, even, good intentioned others, which is natural for adolescents. And even if it's healthy views, they will just, by the mere fact of being an adolescent, just reject it. And this is where her first struggle begins. She often don't have a person to turn to help her shape a very positive view about relationships. And we see that across the girls. And even if she's likely to get a lot of information, a lot of what her view is about is shaped by her peers. And it's definitely not of the highest quality. And what we mean by that is she would say something like, only girls who sleep with truck drivers would get HIV, or only promiscuous girls get HIV, right? And it's really not high quality. It's not effective views. Then girls move to what we call stage 1, which is seeing reality. She's formed an opinion for herself, and she's equipped with her own personal opinion. And she moves to a stage where she experiences life with this view. And there are 2 steps to this stage. The first is representative of her seeking comfort with her worldview. And this first part we called Finding My Place. And she remains in this step until some sort of an event, like Cindy had pointed out, occurs close to her, right? That challenges her personal opinion. For instance, perhaps one of her close friends become positive, and in her opinion, her initial view that she had was only truck drivers get HIV. But then this event creates that anxiety and that blip of risk that we've spoken about. And she moves then to the next step, where she can react to this new reality. And having her view challenged with a negative event causes her to react and see a renewed comfort that everything will still be okay. Her response would be to craft what we call a rule that she would follow that provides her some form of reassurance. This isn't something that she thinks about carefully forever and ever. It's not carefully thought through, and it's more reactive and based on emotional needs. And the real you can liken it to a situation where you wake up in the morning with a terrible hangover, for example, after having a long night of drinking, and then the next morning you would wake up and say, I'll never drink again. Now that's your new rule, that you would never drink again. But we all know that that's really unlikely that we would follow that rule. But it at least makes us feel better. So at the end of this stage, she creates a similar idealized rule, right? So she would, for example, say, I will use a condom every time I have sex. And then she starts by living her life, and then within different relationships, she starts she potentially starts going into stage 2, which we call identifying boundaries, where this stage is really crucial because we see that this seems to be where most adolescent girls are stuck in their journey, because the first part of that is her starting to bend the boundaries. So she has this idealized rule, and she wants that to guide her decisions, but she starts making exceptions because the one partner would be paying for transport, so she can't really use condoms with him, and then the other partner has other rules. So what we see is, and we framed it on the slide deck as a portfolio of rules, which just means she's got different rules for different people when it comes to keeping herself healthy. And there's no single rule that she can follow, and she really struggles, and that's where we look at the typical path in red, dipping at this stage, being stuck, because that seems to be where girls are struggling. But then she ultimately move into where she adapts her boundaries, and there's a steep hill to climb for adolescent girls because it requires her to flip her perspective. And that's what the dotted line signifies as well. She needs to flip her perspective from an external focus where she prioritizes partners to prioritizing herself and her family. And what then happens is that there's a crucial point where she starts acting on a rule and she adheres to a clinically acceptable form of prevention, that is quality. So in this case, we saw girls create in previous stages the option of testing every 3 months, right? Which could be part of her portfolio of rules. But in this stage where she's got a rule for herself, that won't be a high quality rule. And condom use might be one of those quality rules. So when she moves, she starts acting on a rule for herself. she can start embedding that rule and develop a habit loop that can get integrated into a lifestyle. And we see very few girls there. A lot of girls seem to regress there, and we'll quantify this with the next phase. But what we see in stage 4, once she's integrated, then she can start advising others. And I think what's important is that this stage is not about advocacy screaming from the hilltops. It's about her really acting as a role model, and she goes through the process of overcoming judgment to help advise others, still in private stages, and she maintains that habit loop because that is how she evolved. And it doesn't mean that things can't happen and she can regress. It just means that the key milestone for her would be to integrate the habit loop into her lifestyle and then start becoming a role model to others where she not only lives but can encourage them to move through these stages to healthy sexual life.
Great, Yolande, thank you so much. I realize that is a huge amount for everyone on the line to absorb in terms of these 12 insights and how they apply to this journey map. And really want to thank Yolande and Cindy for a remarkable journey here in taking us through the last hour or so. We have just a few more slides for a couple of additional points, and then we're going to open it up for conversation. Already some great questions have come in. I want to encourage people to still put them in the chat feature or email at avac.org, and I'll tell you how to open the line in just a moment. But want to, just before we do that, just to have Annabelle come back for a moment to talk about some of the opportunities to consider how all of these insights and how this framework might be applied. And then I'll ask my colleague Sean Malone to give a sense of what's coming next in the process before we open it up for the conversation. So Annabelle, over to you.
Thanks, and I'll move through this fairly quickly because I do want to hear everybody's opinions and thoughts and questions on the line. So as there's been a lot of information provided this morning, and I'm sure people on the line are thinking, so what do we do with it? And what can we do with it? So there's a couple of things that we are already exploring within South Africa. One is possibly working with the Department of Health to figure out how we can get some better messaging around prevention to adolescent girls and young women. There is a lot of information already that we have within the deck that we can pull from that can help with more precise and more relevant and relatable messaging. We are also providing some information regarding community healthcare workers, which we've pulled from the deck, and this is what you're seeing is very abridged. But we certainly have information from each of the influencer cadre that we spoke about earlier, and we have provided that again to the Department of Health in South Africa, who are overhauling the way the community healthcare workers are working. So there's a couple of practical examples already of what we're doing. We're also working with Vets RHI, who are rolling out a PrEP program to see how we can help, how our learnings can help them. But on a more general basis, we're trying to, again, connect with programmers, implementers, district governments to figure out how do we need to change our programs? What do we need to do to make our programs more consistent, more cohesive, and more consistent in terms of messaging, so girls are not getting conflicting messages, also the messages are not fighting against each other, so that they are more cohesive in the way that we treat girls more holistically, very much like the DREAMS program is doing. And again, something else that we're looking at is possibly looking at a DREAMS program in another country to see how these findings can be applied to DREAMS programs and also outside of South Africa. Getting us to think about what gaps we might have in our programs now based on the knowledge that we're getting from this research that we're conducting. And also, how do we quickly, and this is the big one that Yolanda was talking about, how do we quickly move girls across that journey to stage 3, so that they're at that tipping point where we can actually build confidence and the ability in girls and young women to be able to own their prevention practices, if you like, and understand the value of prevention to them. So reframing their risk rewards. I think the other big issue that we have is how do we create a supportive environment? And we learned from certainly the community healthcare workers, the nurses, and the matriarchs that they would like a better connection between the three of them as well, between those three groups. So what do we have to do, again, as a community to maybe facilitate better communication or better support between those three groups? So if they feel better supported, they can in turn support these adolescent girls and young women better. So there's a lot of things to consider as we work through this framework, and I've only touched the very top tip of this. The other obviously big play here is looking at family planning, and how is family planning impacted by the knowledge that we're getting of the relationship journey. And again, we're working with some implementers to try and figure out where is there an overlap between family planning findings and our findings, where are the gaps, where do we deviate, and how can we support each other through our learnings to provide better programming and to reach the adolescent girls and young women and really make a difference to their lives. So they're just a few things that we're considering. And again, happy to talk to anybody offline, one-to-one about their programs to see how we can maybe help apply some of our learnings that you've heard about today to your programs. With that, I'm going to pass it to Sean, who's going to do a final wrap-up of what's next, and then we'll open up to questions. Sean, you're on mute if you're talking. Okay.
Hello.
Sean, you here?
Sean, go ahead. I think I just unmuted you.
Okay, great. Thanks, colleague. So as you can see, we've come out of the qualitative phase with a lot of questions and insights and even some implications. Where we're going next is the quantitative survey, where we're talking to 2,000 young women. And the idea behind that is that we just want to get an understanding of the different segments or subgroups within this very broad category that we're looking at of adolescent girls and young women, and really acknowledge that even that group is not monolithic, and there might be different ways that we need to reach different segments within that group. So we're doing that now. We're conducting that survey through the end of this year, and we should have findings from the quantitative survey early next year. And we're hoping that tells us about what differences there are in terms of how we can think about reaching different and get us closer to that actionability that we know people are looking for from this research. We're also in the process of designing a discrete choice experiment. That's basically just jargon to say that we're exploring what product characteristics young women would want in HIV prevention products. Not the ones that exist now, but ones that might be coming in the next 5 or 10 years, and what characteristics are the highest priority. So as we have developers working on new prevention technologies, new prevention products, can we help users inform that process and tell developers what they really care about and what they really want? So that's what's coming out of the DCE. Once we get through all of the research, we'll have an opportunity to develop some tools and resources for use by stakeholders. And that's another piece that I think really sets us apart, that we want this research to have a so what piece. We want to come out of this and say, here are some strategies, some tools, some resources that hopefully lots of people can use to inform and strengthen the work that all of you are doing with young women on HIV prevention. And then we also have a chance to design and pilot a few things ourselves. So we'll also be looking at what we've learned and what we think it tells us about some different ways that we might do things in terms of connecting with young women on HIV prevention. So please do stay engaged. We have a lot coming. As you can see, we're still quite early in the overall process, but we really want to do this in a way that's relevant and useful to you. So please stay in touch with us. Please keep us in the loop in terms of your feedback on what you think it will take to make this relevant and useful to you. Next slide, please. Just to close before we move into questions and discussion, we do want to acknowledge that already we have leaned very heavily on a very broad and large group of people for guidance and support. So we started early on talking with a lot of stakeholders on what had already been learned, what had already been done, what you saw as the gaps and needs and priorities. And then throughout this process, we've been trying to stay connected with as many people as we think have an interest in this. So we're not trying to be a nuisance, but we are trying to stay connected and make sure that we keep hearing from you and that we keep benefiting from the experience and expertise and wisdom that all of you have. So this is just a brief slide. Again, more people than we could possibly mention, but this is just a cross-section of groups that have really been supportive and helpful in helping us to keep this work on target. And of course, most of all, we want to acknowledge the more than 2,000 young women that we will have talked to by the time this is over, and the time and thoughts and experiences that they shared with us as part of this research process. So on that note, let me just give the floor back to Mitchell, because we also want to hear from you. And so we've got some time for questions and discussion. Thank you.
Great, Sean. Thank you so much. And to Annabelle, Sindizwe, and Yolande as well, thank you so very much for all the contributions. And thank you all on the line for already some amazingly important questions that have come through the chat feature as well as through email. Again, feel free to continue using avac@avac.org or the chat feature. And in a moment, I'll also just put this up to make sure people's voices can be heard. I'll take us through some of the questions that have come in already. I then will encourage people to ask directly by hitting *7 to unmute your line. Introduce yourself, briefly ask, and then I would ask that you go back on mute so that we can keep the line nice and clear. As I say, we're recording it. And actually it relates to one of the early questions. The slides and a recording of this call will be available on the website shortly after this call. So that will all be available for those of you who want to go back and look at some of these issues or want to share them with colleagues. Because as Sean said, this is really a great desire to share and to be part of a process. And I want to just pick up one of the last questions that just came in with someone who joined a little bit late and asked about whether there's both a qualitative and quantitative phase. And just to maybe go back to this slide very quickly, just to give people a sense that although the team has presented a lot of, I think, very rich information on both the insights and the journey, just want to again highlight that this is coming from a very early phase of the work. You can see that we're barely a third of the way into this graphic of the qualitative work, which is what drove all of the information you heard today. The quantitative work and segmentation work is going, and then these other pieces are forthcoming in 2019 and early 2020. So just to give a sense again of someone's question there. I wonder that there were a couple of questions around the journey, and I might turn to Sindizwe and to Yolande both to answer these too. And I'll ask them both, and then you can choose in which order you want to address them. One was this issue of could you elaborate a bit on habit formation? What does that actually mean? What could it look like? Was the question here. And then another question that came in around the time of the journey map being put up. What might be the implications for some of the role modeling and peer influences? What kinds of programs, given that there are so many now that are training and mentoring young people, what might be advisable coming out of this initial work in terms of peer-to-peer role modeling and influence? So I wonder, maybe I'll put the slide back up of the journey. So if maybe, I'm not sure in which order Yolande and Cindy, you want to take these, but talking a bit about habit formation and the role of peer mentorship and peer role modeling.
Thank you very much for those questions. I think firstly, let's talk about the habit formation, right? If we think about, for example, the habit of personal hygiene and washing your hands, that would be something that we get taught very early on as to, you wake up, you wash your hands before you eat, you wash your hands after you've engaged with maybe animals, or when you've just been busy before you put anything in your mouth. And it becomes really part of your life, sort of in the subconscious, that you can engage with naturally. So when we start looking at healthy sexual relationships and habit formation when it comes to adherence to products and those healthy choices, we need to, as programmers, start asking ourselves how we put products forward and how we introduce it and position it to be part of something that fits into what sexual relationships would need, something that becomes natural and easy to do. I don't know. So that's the one thought. On the peer influences and the implication of this throughout the journey, I think it's very important. We already saw in the first dissemination that just by understanding this journey and this framework, and that girls are potentially at different stages and in different places of their sexual relationship journey and sexual health journey, already helps the peer influencers and peer educators to understand that they can't have a scripted response for everyone that's universal. For one, and we already saw some implementation of this and sharing of this framework across that seemed to work quite effectively. Also, when it comes to peer influences, it's not necessarily the big roadshow, it's the more intimate discussions, the role modeling of your behavior and sharing of your story as to how you created that habit loop, that gives you credibility as a peer influencer. So those are just two key thoughts. I don't know, Annabelle, if you wanted to add anything to those points.
No, I think you've covered it beautifully. Thank you, Yolande.
Great. And then two different questions came in, and maybe I'll start with you, Annabelle, to take it on and see where we go. They relate to segmentation. Someone asked, as you were talking about the next steps, and Sean as well, of what do we mean by segmentation? What does that actually look like? And then another question came in, which is just toward the end, which is superb, which is asking, or making a comment here, that it would be interesting to see how the people who have been involved so far in the qualitative phase, how they might be placed on the journey. Where are they, so quote unquote, distributed along that journey? So I wonder if maybe giving a little bit of insight in what that looks like and what it could look like in terms of the segmentation to come.
So I'll answer the first question, which is what is segmentation, and thank you for your interest in segmentation, one of my personal passions. Segmentation is about getting a group of people and then dividing them across however we might want to divide them. In this particular project, we're dividing them by psychographic and behavioural elements. And that means we'll divide them along beliefs, along how they might behave in terms of prevention, in terms of attitudes, a range of issues. Typically, in development, when we segment, we will segment by age or we will segment by location. There's been very few programs that have segmented in any sort of deep psychographic way. VMMC has done it in Zambia and Zimbabwe and is now doing it further afield. And there's been some groups in Malawi and Nigeria segmenting along different psychographic lines. What that means is that not all girls aged 15 to 19 or 20 to 24 are the same. Within that range of girls, you're going to have many different behaviours. And unless we acknowledge the different behaviours, we start talking to them all in the same way, and it might not be relevant to them. So what is relevant to one girl who is 18, for example, and what might be relevant to her is to finish her studies, might not be relevant to another girl who's 18, who may be more interested in finding a boyfriend or setting up a business immediately, or she may have a whole range of different interests. And if you think about yourself and people in your age group or people in your neighbourhood, you know, we're all very different. And speaking to everybody like they are one large group with no variations only gets you so far. And that sort of work is great. We can find that sort of work useful in mass audiences, but certainly with the sort of sensitive subjects that we're talking about around sex, around relationships, at that more interpersonal level, we need to have those nuances so that we can speak to people in a way that matters to them, in a way that they understand, and in a way that will keep them engaged. And I'll give you the example in BMC, speaking to one group of men about how having circumcision might be more attractive to girls was only really relevant to one group of men, but not relevant to the next group. So if you're speaking to the group of men about this sort of particular issue, they're just not interested. So they're not going to take up your service or your product. So again, it's about tailoring, and it's about having a deeper understanding of the end user, which is what this project is all about. In terms of where our people are, the girls that we've so far interviewed, the 240 that we've interviewed are along this journey. And then in terms of the segmentation, a couple of points. We will likely find, and I don't know, I can't predict, but we will likely find that some segments are more likely to be at certain stages in this journey than others. And what we need to be clear is that we might find that some girls are stuck in stage 1 or 2 all the time, and that segment may well be stuck in that stage. But you will probably find that the segments are spread across. However, one segment is likely to have a higher concentration of people within that segment sitting in one of these stages. I don't know yet because I'm hypothesising. So stay tuned for instalment 2. That's the cliffhanger, the page turner that you can all look forward to in February when we do this again. With the 245 girls that we spoke to, we did try and recruit along the traditional stages of the marketing adoption journey that was referred to initially. So we tried to recruit along the lines of girls that were already using a prevention product, regularly girls that were adolescent girls and young women that were talking about acting as role models and talking about prevention in their communities. So we did actually recruit along some journey lines, and we didn't have many problems doing that recruiting. However, what I can say is we don't know how reflective that recruiting is going to be of what we get in our segmentation. I think we'll find, because we very much wanted to figure out what the journey was, as I said, and we started off with that very traditional adoption journey. So we wanted a representation of everybody along that journey in order to get this research and have representation across each stage in the research. How that is going to play out in the segmentation, I don't know, and when we think that the segmentation should be reflective of the population, it will be interesting to see where the high-risk populations sit along that journey. Again, it's a cliffhanger.
Great. Thanks so much, Annabelle. And I think, and one thing I would add, and perhaps to move into another question that came up that is just an absolutely perfect question from a great colleague in South Africa, asking, with great thanks for the presentation, but commenting that there's not much here that he saw that struck him as entirely new, and that what's different about these findings. I think for many people who I knew that that, or that's what we've already been doing. So, and I think that's a really fair question, and one that I know I struggle with all the time in this work. And let me maybe begin an answer, and then I'd love to have all the group, Annabelle, Yolande, Cindy, and Sean, all maybe take a crack at that, of what is new and different that you didn't already know, because that is fundamentally why to do this work. It's not to restate what is known, but to really try to move the field forward. And I think one thing I'll start with that I do think that this issue of and segmentation, that, well, I believe that many of these insights were very well known and documented. The way programs have structured around thinking about any form of segmentation, if thinking about it at all, have been on geographic basis in particular areas, or saying this group of young women, 15 to 24 or 15 to 18-year-olds in this community or in this township or in this sub-district should get this kind of intervention. That's the level of which many programs have segmented, often around what we think of as demographics, basically age and place. One of the things that I think is new and different, and again I'd love to have the others comment too on what they think is new and different, but that this journey and the future segments are not looking at demographics, that 7 different 15-year-old young women in the same exact community may be on 7 different places on this journey. And the programs need to be tailored to where they are on that journey, not how old they are or where they live. And so I think, to answer Ntanja's question, which really was spot on, that perhaps some of the insights were not new, but the application of them to try to drive forward an ability to segment. And again, a lot of this comes from the circumstances that Annabelle mentioned, that really looked at how men respond to circumcision, not because of how where they were geographically, but of where they were on the journey to circumcision. That is actually a relatively easy journey because it has a destination, to get circumcised. Obviously, this journey, one of the things I think that Yolande said, but just to reinforce it, is that the journey here doesn't have an end point. It's not resulting in a circumcision or in a single procedure, but rather this ongoing programmatic use. And so I think that is a really important difference. How it gets used is still very much up for discussion, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to put this out there. So really appreciate the feedback in trying to understand what to do with it. But maybe I'll stare and see, Annabelle, Sean, if any of you want, what is new and different, but why was it new and different?
Yeah, Mitchell, can you hear me?
Oh, go ahead.
Mitchell? Yeah. Let me give one example that I think is very concrete here in South Africa. The insight that we have around young women prioritizing relationships.
You're cutting a little closer to the phone.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, the insight we have on young women prioritizing relationships and not necessarily prioritizing HIV might or might not be intuitive, might not already be known, but we have a campaign going in South Africa
Sean,
right
I'm
now.
so sorry. We're losing every few words. Try again.
Sorry, are you getting me now? Sorry about that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, one of the insights from the research is that young women prioritize relationships over HIV prevention. We might know that already, but at the same time, we've got a campaign going in South Africa right now. The central messages to young women is forego relationships. Forget those pesky boys, finish your education, and think about relationships later. So whether we knew that or not, we're not making use of it. We're plowing ahead with the message that we think young women should hear, rather than saying, you know what, it's probably inevitable that young women want to be in relationships. So let's help them choose partners wisely. Let's help them set good boundaries. Let's help them establish good relationship dynamics. Let's help them in the midst of those relationships rather than telling them to stay out of relationships. That's one that immediately came to mind for me in terms of the way that this could be directly relevant to the response here.
Hey, thanks so much.
Yeah.
I don't know. Or Cindy, do you want to add anything? Go ahead.
I was just going to add that this is a population that's been studied for many, many years, and our findings are very much standing on the shoulders of all the great work that has come before us. So I think you will find that there is some things that we know. I think there are nuances in there that we didn't know. For example, the issue of the way that girls view pregnancy. We all know that they want to prevent pregnancy, but I don't know that we all knew that they don't. They just want to avoid HIV. It is not this. It's a very passive approach to HIV. I think issues like that are sort of a little bit new in terms of the nuances that we're finding. I think the integrated work, the integrated nature of this work, where we're drawing everything together into one journey framework, is new, and I think the journey framework is very new. I don't think anybody has done a journey framework that really tracks what adolescent girls and young women are going through and what the inflection points are and how we can leverage those inflection points. I think that's quite new, and hopefully hopeful that we can add to the field of the knowledge that is out there. I think one of the biggest... Sorry, I'll leave it at that. No, I'll leave it at that. Yolanda, I know Yolanda wanted to say something as well.
Great. Yolanda or Cindy?
No, I think Annabelle said it. I think it's very important that this does resonate with work that has gone before, because there's some magnificent work that has gone before. What this framework really allows us to do as a community is to have a shared understanding that is based on a user-centered approach, which means that it is their journey to sexual health and relationships, and it's not imposed on them. It's not just theoretical in that sense. And when we start having further discussion around the goals and programming and its implementation, we then have this shared framework to use as base not only for the discussions, for the programming, but to use the nuances within that understanding to make sure that we meet the adolescent girls and young women where they are and not necessarily where we want them to be.
Great. Thanks, Yolanda. Cindy, did you want to add anything real quickly before? There was one more question. Any comments?
I think to avoid being redundant to where it has been said, I think from a grassroots approach, having been doing research in this field for so many years, and again, as Yolanda said, acknowledging work that has been done before, methodologically, this is something that it was the first time I came across, mapping these girls' journeys, looking at the milestones that have shaped them psychographically, emotionally, and otherwise in terms of their relationship to themselves and also the relationship to their bodies and HIV. And so for me, that was new. That was groundbreaking for me, to be able to sit with the girl and go through this whole journey and be able to map out for her what it is that she's seeing it through her eyes. And really that participatory approach was quite unique. So let me leave it at that.
Now that's super helpful, and I do want to say that obviously we'd love to make sure that anyone who wants to know more, learn more, be part of this, to let us know and to connect. And I think that methodology is. And I think fundamentally, and back to Antondo, your question, inevitably, like so much of any kind of research or information generation, it's actually not at all it's what we do with them, and the we being all of us. And I should also say, for those who don't know so well, that AVAC and this program are not implementers and are not planning to AVAC's plan or on these as an organization doing work in this space. It is the insights getting implementers with government, with PEPFAR funding, local community implementers to see these insights and to collaborate on how they might be applied to young women or with or other influencers. And so it really is what happens with this information, not the information itself. But related to that, and Cindy, you about some of the milestones, but there was a wonderful question that just came in about to what extent would you say the ability positive set of habits is dependent on having a life goal that a person believes is achievable. As you talked about, if there's anything you can say in response to that, is the achievable, feasible, and how that might play into this setting of habit loops.
Michelle, I'm so sorry. I may have to ask you to please repeat that question for me.
Oh, sorry. It was no problem. I have technical problems with. But it's to what extent would you say that the ability to develop a positive set of habits is dependent on a goal that the person believes is achievable?
Yes.
And that's for anybody who wants to answer.
Very, very important. All right. Right. That was the time that we were learning from the girls about having a positive mind and a positive, achievable goal was quite important at them along this particular journey. I mean, we have to remember who the girls are and what sort of circumstances they are with and the environments that they are currently living in. Because I think sometimes because they were just so very energetic and intelligent and very social, you forget that they're coming from environments that in many, many ways have very self-destructive behaviors. They're coming in environments where, as I mentioned earlier on, where they are coming from child-hated homes, where they are surrounded in communities where HIV has affected and killed out a huge generation of people, where they do not have access to health care, where they do not have parenting and guidance and mentoring as you would expect. Some of them come from school systems that are failing them. So when you really look at it from that perspective, you realize how important it is for these girls to have that goal in mind, because it's all integrated. And again, just touching on why this research for me was part groundbreaking and different, because you realize, as Yolande said, that they don't have a HIV prevention plan, and it has to do a lot with relationships, but more especially because it is integrated with health and relationships and themselves. Being somebody that is going to be proactive about preventing yourself from HIV has a lot to do with not just access, but what you think about yourself, who you are, and your goals in life. That becomes quite integral into them wanting to use a prevention method because they want to live and they want to be successful, versus those that have a very low sense of self and low sense of esteem because of the debilitating social, environmental, and psychological issues that they are dealing with.
Great, Cindy. That was full and I know some of the some notes that incredibly clear toward the end. Thank you. I'm really grateful that stayed for 2 full hours to hear, to reiterate that just the beginning of a journey. This is we are quite far from any form of destination and really want more input. If we haven't answered your questions, if you have new questions, if you really want to understand what can be done now and what is going to happen in the future, please do let us know. Forward to that. I do want to just just to show people the latest just in October, No Prevention, No End. The first chapter really does talk a lot about this idea of demand creation for prevention and human-centered design, and here are just a few graphics from that, and that report is at AGYW.org. But as we had this, it really, and this reminded me that something we often, it's really important to watch your language and to be clear and explicit. And we talk so much about HIV prevention. It's really what AVAC is focused on. We have a whole project here now called the Prevention Market Manager. And so one of the insights really, we've known for 30 years that young women and young men were more concerned of falling pregnant than of getting HIV. But we've continued to talk about HIV prevention. And so for me, one of those insights that when and the emission, well, I'm doing X or pregnancy, that's all I need to about avoiding HIV, that the semantics, that language really matters. We should have said no end, but it working with people who we seek to serve. Human-centered design is meant new thinking, new approaches, and new voices into human-centered programs that will give people what they want, when they want it, and that they can use it. And I think the one other thing I'd say, and I'm so pleased in this call that we, about oral PrEP or about delivering ring or about a next generation prevention product. It's about the individual and the systems that need to deliver to that individual supporting structures. And I think that's really essential to this conversation, and that the insight here is that this is not about a pill or a ring or an injection. I want to thank everyone. Again, the recordings and the resource materials will be online very shortly. And please do keep the conversation going with us. And we'd love to hear more, and just really am enormously grateful to everyone for being on the line, and especially to Sean, Annabelle, Cindy, and to Yolande for an exciting collaboration going forward. So have great afternoons and evenings, and looking forward to talking again very, very soon.